thank you all for coming on this beautiful evening. Wow, a machaya, whew, which means life-giving. That's what a machaya is, like chai, isn't it? Anyway, Michael and I met in rabbinical school in 1985 and became fast friends and have stayed in touch ever since, and both personally and professionally. And Michael served as the rabbi in Manchester Center, Vermont, for 11 years, 10 years, and then started splitting his life, he and his family, splitting their time between Kibbutz Ketura in Israel, where the Arava Institute is, and Vermont, where he teaches conflict resolution at Bennington and does a lot of other really interesting and important things, and also works for the Arava Institute when he's in the States. Michael was in Israel when October 7th happened. He was at Ketura, which is in the far south of Israel, and came back this past November, and has been back in the States since then. So Michael's going to speak about the work of the Arava Institute, which is quite remarkable, even in the midst of the war. And then I'm going to ask him a few more questions, and then there'll be a chance for you all to ask him your questions. And so, so thank you for being here, and please.
So thank you, Jonathan and Karen, for having me, and the congregation, and thank you all for turning up on this lovely, lovely evening. I'm going to present a hybrid of sermons, vignettes, quotes, and some of my writings from last year to try to transport us back to the kibbutz during the last difficult year. We'll talk about 40 minutes or so. If I see people are falling asleep, I will cut it shorter. And so, and I'll listen to that sign language. So this talk is called Cultivating Hope in a Time of Conflict, Building the Foundation for a Future of Peace. We are, as the title says, in a time of conflict. Dark times, some would say. But we should not forget that the color black is actually composed of all the diverse and brilliant colors mixed together, reminding us that sometimes the answer can lie within the challenge. As John Lennon sang, people asking questions lost in confusion, well, I tell them there's no problem, only solutions. Lennon is not saying that problems don't exist, but what he's asking us to do is to focus on the solutions, because that puts us at a more powerful place, and it answers the problem. It's somewhat similar in how our tradition of reading Haftarot on Shabbat morning. If it ends on a negative note, we make sure to repeat a verse above that ended positively. That gives us agency to feel better about who we are and what our agenda is. So I want to start here with a quote from an Arava student from 2022. A few nights ago, I was sitting outside with a few people from the Arava Institute. It was early evening, and we were drinking tea, and I could see the stars peering through the clouds. It was the day after the attack in Bnei Brak. Feelings of tension hung heavy in the air. Sitting there beside me were Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans when I saw a light spread across the sky. I turned to my friend. Wow, did you see that? It was a shooting star. She replied, make a wish. It was suddenly just so obvious to me. I wish for us to all to learn to see each other as humans, to bear witness to each other's pain, to hear one another's stories. She goes on. Less than a year ago, I could not imagine such a wish. I moved to Israel when I was 5 years old, but I never had formed friendships with Arab Israelis. I was full of fear. Now I have Palestinian friends who listen to my perspective and acknowledge my pain, and I hear theirs. What transpires at the Institute is not a sentimental, oversimplistic kumbaya experience. The conversations are difficult, but we do not have the luxury to disengage. I'm sorry if the person who had that, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry, glad. So you all just noticed my left hand. I also have a right hand that's just as valid, that's just as important at this hand. But in the asymmetry of the sensational, the violent, the bombastic, the loud, the negative gets all of the attention and not this. I first learned that in 1976 in Ewing, New Jersey, growing up. There had been race riots in my junior high. 3 years later, I'm in the high school. I'm very much involved in politics in the high school. A local reporter wanted to do an article in race relations 3 years after the race riots. So I said, I'll gather a bunch of African-American and white students and we'll talk about it. The administration freaked out. My role model progressive teachers freaked out. And my parents said, have everyone to our house. So we did. And the basic story was we all went to school together. We might be able to play together on the track team together. But at the end of the day, we went back to our very segregated homes and neighborhoods. During basketball games, African-Americans sat there, white people sat here, and there were a few salt and peppers, that we would move from section to section, but it was really clear where you were supposed to be. That was the story. So I called the reporter a few days later. I said, when's the article coming out? And he said, there's no article. There's no gangs, there's no fear, there's no violence, there's no article. I learned that in high school. Fast forward now, some 30 years or so to January 2001, and the Israelis and Palestinians are negotiating at Taba, just across the Egyptian border from Eilat. It's one of the times we actually got is probably the closest we ever got to an agreement. And I thought, wow, here we are 30 miles north of Taba. We are modeling what these Israelis and Palestinian negotiators are trying to figure out. This seems like a great story for the world's media. So I gather up all my materials in Hebrew, English, and Arabic, and I go to the border. The Israelis are very suspicious, but they let me through. The Egyptians take my materials, put me in a room with a guy with a machine gun outside the door. The general calls Cairo, blah, 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 blah. Eventually, they let me in. So I make my pitch. We're modeling what they're negotiating. Great story. Rabbi, there's hard news and there's soft news. And you're soft news. And if we remember, and if we care, and if we have the time. So I relearned that in the course of this work. The asymmetry of the sensational wins out. As you all know, in Hebrew, emet is the word for truth. It's more or less the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, because emet or truth should be all-encompassing, right? What we read in the media should be all-encompassing and give us the full picture. Sheker, which is lie, is shin kuf resh, 3 letters right next to each other, because a lie only gives us part of the picture. So when we're only told the negative, we're actually being fed a lie, and it only reinforces for those people who fear the other why they should fear the other. And we have to get better at overcoming that asymmetry of the sensational. And it's very easy to conclude that violence is the human way. UNESCO actually examined this in 1986 in Seville, Spain, and they came up with a statement. What do you think their conclusion was about humans and violence? Pardon? It's normal. 1, it is scientifically incorrect to say that we have inherited a tendency to make war from our animal ancestors. 2, it is scientifically incorrect to say that war or other violent behaviors is genetically programmed into our human nature. 3, and it goes on and on and on. Finally, it concludes, just as wars begin in the minds of men, peace also begins in our minds. The same species who invented war is capable of inventing peace. The responsibility lies with each of us. And we're reminded of this actually every morning in the Siddur. By the way, one of my rabbinic fantasies is like start services and everyone comes late and everyone misses the beginning of the Siddur. The best part of the Siddur are the opening pages that are there to turn us and guide us into the better angels of ourselves. It's a pushback to what we're always being fed, that we can work on that and cultivate our better angels. Take a look at the beginning of the Siddur next time you're at services. So we fortify ourselves by those pages of the Siddur, as I hope you will be fortified this evening as we try to turn cacophony into harmony so that we can better understand how to cultivate hope in a time of conflict and build a foundation for a future of peace. So one example of overcoming that asymmetry of the sensational is the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies, located on Kibbutz Ketura, where since 1996 we've brought together Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, Palestinians, Jordanians, Moroccans, and students from around the world to examine the environmental issues of the region and the world. It was founded, as I said, in 1996 in the wake of the Israeli-Egyptian and the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaties and the Oslo peace process. The Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty was actually signed just down the road from the kibbutz in the Arava on the border there. So in 1996, my wife and I and our children 4 and 2, come off the Egged bus. It was hot. And I was there for that first magic year. In 1996, we thought we were going to do it. And I discovered that the program was the address for so many of my passions: peace, the environment, cross-cultural learning, kibbutz living, desert living, and I would argue the best of Zionism. So we've now done this 8 times, staying anywhere from 6 months to 2.5 years. As Jonathan said, we were there September 7th, 2023 until November 2024. We now have a big office in Boston with Rachel Calico, our CEO, and a huge staff. After our second visit in 2001, I started the Friends of Arava office in our house, and now it's grown. So ideally, our student body, oh, by the way, in 1996, I, Rabbi Michael Cohen, I went to Gaza to do student recruitment, and I felt as safe as anything. And actually, on the way out, my Palestinian hosts were telling Yasser Arafat jokes. We can't even imagine that now, and it really shows how backwards we've gone and how much more difficult our work is. When I say our, I mean the whole ecosystem of what Arava represents. There are another 160 organizations with the Alliance for Middle East Peace. A whole bunch have sprung up in these last 650 days, but our work is harder and more important than it was when we started in 96. Ideally, our student body is 1/3 Israeli Jewish, 1/3 Arab, meaning Israeli Arab, Palestinian, West Bank, Gaza, Jordanian, Moroccan, 1/3 the rest of the world, of which about half are from the United States. Students take undergraduate courses in various aspects of the environment. We also have a program for interns after college to intern in some of our transboundary research departments. We have a Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation. Some of the highest solar radiation in the world is near Kibbutz Ketura. The first solar field for electricity in Israel was built on Kibbutz Ketura in 2011. I helped Yossi Abramowitz do that. And it's historic for a second reason. It's the first self-cleaning solar panel. One of the challenges of solar panels, particularly in that part of the world, is dust and sand, which reduces your electronic output by 30%. So picture those plastic things in a car wash, but without water. So they go over it and they clean them. They're also solar powered. Question for you all: do you do it at the beginning of the day or the end of the day? When do you do that, and why? And we'll accept all answers, even if they're wrong. It's okay. Just use your imagination, because there is an answer, actually. Beginning, why? Okay, good. You actually do it at the end of the day, because we forget about it in the desert. We know this from the Siddur. There is often dew in the desert. And so if in the morning you're going over dust that's wet, it's going to become mud and just smear on the panel. But at the end of the day, when it's really, really hot, it's so dry, it comes off. So we have a whole center doing research there. We have a center for transboundary water research. Water is the issue of the Middle East. No water body knows a political border. When I drink water on the kibbutz, I don't know whether this water is from an aquifer. The water came from the Jordanian side of the aquifer or the Israeli side of the aquifer. I ride my bike every day to the Israeli-Jordanian border, which I just love. It's just so calming and peaceful. But in the winter, when we have clouds, and like in the summer when it's always blue sky, the clouds, when they get to the Israeli-Jordanian border, they don't go through passport control, right? They just float into Jordan. The environment doesn't know from any of this, and I'll circle back to that as well. We have a Center for Applied Environmental Diplomacy. We are what's called Track 2. Like Track 1 are government negotiators. They have to do the chess match, and that's how they work and operate. On the Track 2 level, NGOs, education organizations, we can be a bit more flexible. So for the number of years, we've had successes because we can be more flexible. And so we had this chutzpahdik idea a couple of years ago that maybe we could teach the Track 1 people a thing or two. At our second conference, we actually invited Dennis Ross, the great diplomat, classic Track 1 diplomat, but amazing diplomat. And he came and he said, mea culpa. We forgot during the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty, the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty, and during Oslo about all of you. So he's kind of given us the hechsher, the stamp of approval from the track one world for what we're doing. So we're working in Gaza now with our Palestinian partners. We're bringing in off-grid, decentralized water and energy systems for some of the displaced camps there for the Gazans. Our Gazan partner insisted that one of them be named after Vivian Silver. Vivian Silver was one of the founders of Women Wage Peace, this pioneer, incredible woman of Israeli and Palestinian women waging peace. She was brutally murdered in her house on October 7th. Our Palestinian partner insisted on naming one of our sites there after her in Gaza. And that just speaks about the bridges and the connections that we're able to build through the type of work that we do. We're holding a conference in Washington, D.C. with Duke University on the day after. How do we rebuild Gaza with these technologies and others as well? So in the first couple of years of the Institute, we figured there's what we call the camel in the tent, the conflict. And we figured it would get talked about, and it did, and it was fine. When the second intifada hit, and we were actually there also for the second intifada, it was clear we needed to create a different space for those conversations. So we created something called Peace Building Environmental Leadership Seminar. It's now become the Dialogue Forum. We create a safe place where Israelis and Palestinians and others can say the most difficult things to each other, hear the most difficult things about themselves, and things don't fall apart. And I'll get to that later on. But that was a change that we need to make. So here's a quote from Michael Thompson from reflecting on the Pell Sessions or Dialogue Project. One of the most impactful takeaways for me with those discussions was how to accept and attempt empathy for others' fears without feeling like those fears were in competition with your own. We had a guest facilitator give a talk on the danger of yes, but thinking. Asking what happens if we say yes, period. Another alumni said, that is one of the simplest and hardest concepts to do. So as I mentioned, we arrived on Ketura September 7th last year, a month before October 7th. And the week after October 7th, I wrote the following. The violence, horror, and death of the war came to me in a hushed whisper across the sanctuary of the kibbutz synagogue as I heard her words, Gaza, terrorists, attack, dead, war. She then crossed the room to explain, but the words soft and quiet needed no amplification. To translate and to make audible the muted sounds, only denial could erase the reality. We had gathered to celebrate the holiday of Torah, as a decision was made to mute the joy as a response to the news of the morning. One is called up to the Torah to bless its holy words before it is read. At the same time, a general call-up was taking place around the country for the army. At the holiday of Simchat Torah, we finished reading the Torah by chanting the final verses of the book of Deuteronomy, and immediately we roll the Torah to the beginning to start to read once again the book of Genesis and its opening tale of darkness and light. Most books are put down once they are read and maybe never picked up again or only after many years, but not the Torah. Why? One thought, we learn new lessons each year that we have previously missed because we have new experiences that make us different, and so we see things anew. In this way, the annual reading of the Torah becomes a Rorschach test of who we are, how we have changed, and see things anew. Again, a war with Gaza, missed lessons cry out to us. We say a number of times in our prayers, Oseh shalom b'momav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yakol yoshvei tevel. May the one who creates peace on high bring peace to us and to all Israel and to all who dwell on earth. With all due respect, I don't care about God helping with peace in heaven. There are enough righteous souls, tzaddikim and angels there to figure it out. But here on earth, we need so much more help. We read in the Torah, it is not in heaven. Our focus is here, not there. So God, let heaven make peace on its own. But down here, we need your help so much more than they do on high. 6 weeks into the war, I was asked by the Jerusalem Post to write a piece about what was going on at the Institute. On the second day of the war, I was packing up to go home from my office. Since the day before, the horrific descriptions of the heinous massacre by Hamas and the beginning of the war were constant, sometimes at the forefront, sometimes beneath the surface, but always, always present. That awareness hovered in my mind as I was about to collect bottles to fill with water and place them in the bomb shelters of the kibbutz. In a despondent mindset, thinking what that would mean should we have to use them, David Lair, the director of the Institute's Center for Applied Environment Diplomas, saw me and said, "I think you want to come and hear this," as he invited me into the Institute's conference room. Sitting at the table were a group of Jews and Arabs. Some were students and alumni of the Institute. They were there to present their idea for a joint Arab-Jewish community in the southern Arava, a bold idea in and of itself, but in the context of the brutality and violence and chaos taking place, it was audacious and a fearless idea. As one of the participants say, we are trying to establish sanity in the insanity. The idea had been percolating within the group for some 70 individuals for the past 5 years. Their goal is to establish a multicultural community dedicated to building a transformative space and society. One objective is to erase the minority-majority identities as a path to challenge and defy the limitations of those labels. They want to create a home where they can be their authentic selves and not, as they explain, wear the masks of their different societies that put pressure on them to conform. As Robert Frost wrote, we know, home is the place where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. They actualize at that moment the spirit of the mission of the Arava Institute, to advance cross-border environmental cooperation in the face of political conflict. That's our mission. These young activists, as the horrific atrocities committed in the Gaza border area were becoming clear and the latest war with Hamas was commencing, were still able to continue to work towards a different horizon. I left the meeting emboldened, even as I went to fill those bottles of water, confronting what they represented. I'm going to share some other vignettes from the last year and a half. 3 of our Israeli men were called up for the war with 3 very different reactions. One manned up, put on his fatigues, and left to war. The second drank until he blacked out and then went the next day. The third was in his room, out of his room. He couldn't sleep. He's in and out, and the fellow students were trying to comfort him. And at one point, one of the Israeli Arabs, remember, they don't serve in the army, but he was trying to give him comfort, said, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay." And this Israeli snapped at him and said, "You have no idea what I'm going through. You don't know the fear that I have." And for this Israeli Arab, who always assumed that anybody wearing the Israeli fatigues was macho and didn't question anything, it was an eye-opening experience for him. And they both were then vulnerable to each other at that moment. And those are the moments that happen when we then have the real conversations. At the very beginning of the war, we worked to get 2 alumni out of Gaza and one of the mothers of an alum out of Gaza. Long, long process, but something that kind of has been forgotten. Egypt charges between $7,000 and $10,000 a person to let a Palestinian out of Gaza. Now think about how much money Gazans make, even in good days. It's atrocious that the Egyptians were doing this, and they're just never called upon it as well. A year into the war, we have some Palestinian students on the campus, and as often happens, they will join for the religious activities of the community. So they came to Kol Nidre services in the kibbutz synagogue, a first time for them in a synagogue. These are Palestinians. And one of them commented that the whole experience for him was a comforting experience. Now, mind you, 2 rows behind them were 3 Israeli soldiers in army fatigues along with their machine guns. The hope, the contradictions, and the reality of what we deal with. Culture night is one of the highlights of each semester because we share each other's cultures. And last year we have a staff member whose family originally Syrian Jews, they're originally from Syria. And they brought this tradition of singing Achad Miyodea in Arabic to their Seder in Israel. So picture this. He's teaching this to everybody, but it's the Palestinians and the Israeli Arabs who have no problem singing along because they know the Arabic to this Jewish song, and us Jews are like, okay. But those are the kind of moments that we're able to have. Another student was called up before he came to the institute, was called up at the beginning of the war. He's injured about a month into the war, very seriously. He's in rehab, both mental and physical, until 3 days before the fall semester a year later. And he decides to have a rebirthing ceremony. So sitting next to him during this rebirthing ceremony, being injured and almost killed in Gaza, are 2 Palestinians hugging him. At the end of the fall semester, fall 23, 3 months into the war, I was asked to give the graduation talk. And I'm going to quote from some of it here because it's about there, but it's also about here. So that's why I'm going to quote it in full-ish. Charles Dickens begins his novel, A Tale of Two Cities, about the tumultuous times of the French Revolution with his famous opening, "It was the best of times, it was the..." Those same words can also frame the experience this semester at the Arava Institute. What you achieved, what you created here, was the best of times, while around us, the worst of times. The underpinning of encountering the best and the worst simultaneously can be unsettling, as there appears to be nothing solid, nothing consistent that we can latch onto. In that uncertainty, perhaps also lies the answer. Our campus is located and situated in the beautiful Arava Valley, a section of the Syrian-African rift stretching 4,300 miles from Syria to Mozambique. Formed some 20 million years ago, the Arava Valley is the result of 2 massive tectonic plates, the African plate to the west and the Arabian plate to the east, rifting apart as well as moving at different rates northward. That is to say there is no firm ground, no terra firma to stand on. And yet, here we are, feeling unmoved as the ground beneath us moves and groans. That is the nature of nature. The environment, our world, our lives, the imperfection of perfection, the consistency of inconsistency, the inconsistency of consistency. We often live our lives with the illusion of the constant, but change is the real constant. We learned on our hike last Friday as we examined the layers of limestone and ammonite fossils laying on the ancient seabeds, along with the varied colors of gypsum, our favorite color, sushi salmon. We learned that where we stand at this moment, when the continental land masses look like some 200 million years ago, that we would have found ourselves living actually south of the equator. To understand change, we turn to the Northern Star, right? In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Act 3, Scene 1, Julius Caesar says, "I could well be moved if I were as you. If I could pray to move, prayers would move me. But I am as constant as the Northern Star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament." More recently, Joni Mitchell sings, "I am as constant as a Northern Star." Both she and Shakespeare use the Northern Star as a metaphor for that which is unmoved and can therefore be relied upon. However, they are both wrong. Because of the Earth's wobble as it spins, 14 stars take turns being the Northern Star during an ever-repeating 26,000-year cycle. While Polaris is now the Northern Star, some 3,000 years ago, around the time of King David and King Solomon in ancient Egypt, the star Kochav, which actually means star in Hebrew, was the Northern Star. In 1,000 years from now, Eri will be the Northern Star. All this is to say, we trick ourselves into believing that our world is constructed, if you will, on firm plates. In times of war, we're reminded of that false illusion. Jaudat, who is a student at the Institute, described his time here as a big container for confusion and curiosity that also makes me more hopeful. Take that special container with you as the world and our lives pen the pages of a complex and at times complicated novel. As we've discussed, the real piece is messy, including the very different narratives and different orientations of our internal dialogues we all carry within ourselves. Our work is not to see them in conflict or to make them go away, but to allow them to be heard like notes in a musical score, a polyphony with 2 or more sounds happening simultaneously, or a polyphonic texture where 2 or more independent melodic lines are heard at the same time, or a polyrhythm when several independent rhythmic lines play at the same time. Compose that song, compose your song by continuing and nurturing this family you've created here, but in a new form, in a new setting, a new musical key. You and we, the Institute and alumni, can work together to change that cacophony, the noise, the tumult that surrounds us these days, and transpose it to a more energetic, and influential song. Play it louder and louder, and as we discussed, widen the circle. By doing all of that, the best of times remains within our grasp. So, our alumni are amazing, and I can go into that further, but you should just know that one of our alumni won an Oscar a few weeks ago. I've seen many have talked about No Other Land, the documentary about what's going on in the horrors of the West Bank. And Rachel Skor, who is one of the directors, is an Arava alum. So they're doing great things. So I'm going to close here. I want to talk about why it works, what's happening now, and a quote. Yes. Okay. So how does this work? I would argue there are 5 reasons why the Institute works. You have to be intentional when you bring people in conflict together. So 3 of them actually have to do with place. So it's our Kibbutz Ketura, founded right after the Yom Kippur War in 1973 by young Judean American Zionists who infused their Zionism with this sense of democracy and pluralism. So in Kibbutz Ketura, you have both religious and non-religious people living together intentionally, which is very rare for Israel. So you've got the Arava Institute, which is about as pluralistic as you can imagine, coming into a community that understands the value and the challenges and the difficulties at times of living in a pluralistic community. The second is the desert. We usually talk about the conflict or the center of the country, the Merkaz, where there's lots of tension. There's something incredibly calming about the desert. I don't think it's and also the desert there's no topsoil. It's just the limestone and sandstone and magmatic rocks are all exposed. And I think when you're in a place where everything's exposed, you become exposed to that still small voice. It's not by accident that Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses spent a lot of time there. So there's something very calming about that. The third is the Middle East. There's something about bringing Israelis and Palestinians out of the Middle East to Vermont, New York, Cyprus, wherever, yes. But the problem is people don't know their own neighbors there. So on the weekends, our students go to their various homes in Israel, Palestine, Jordan. Jordanians have always been under a lot of pressure not to come, but they come and then they bring their Israeli and American Jewish friends home. And I've heard this anecdote over and over again. At the end of the day, they're washing dishes, usually with their mother, who says, you know what? I learned I have more in common with the Israeli Jew than the American Jew. Yeah, they live in the Middle East just like you do. And those are the things that we're able to break those barriers down. The fourth element, which is maybe the most important, is time. Usually we would bring Israelis and Palestinians together. It's maybe for a weekend, maybe a 2-week intensive. Our students are together 24/7 for a full semester or a full year, and sometimes even longer. Time does a number of things. One, if you're only meeting about the conflict, this actually hurts. But if you've got other touch points about religion, music, food, culture, projects you're working on together, you have the time to meet each other as human beings and to build trust. It's the one main thing that's missing in that part of the world. There's no trust. Because if you trust somebody, you can still imagine working together and going forward. The second really important thing about time is that after one of these really intense Pell sessions, where they sometimes leave crying and hurt, a week later and say, Muhammad, I can't believe you said that. Let's go walk out the back gate of the kibbutz and have a conversation. Or Shulamit, you really think that? Time is a luxury that allows us at the right moments to have the real conversations. And the final point is about what the conflict's about, which is land. When we look at this piece of real estate, if you will, from the perspective of geopolitics, we see lines, borders, walls, and divisions. When we look at that exact same piece of real estate from the perspective of the environment, those issues are there, but you can kind of nudge them to the side for a bit because you have to work with your neighbor. And then you can go back to the political side, and you build trust by working with your neighbor. So those 5 pieces, I would argue, allow us to work the way that we do. Bringing it back home, with the termination of USAID, we lost 23% of our budget, $1.29 million in one go. Plus, we can't apply to United States Institute of Peace anymore. And it's not just us, it's all these organizations in the conflict, and I won't even talk about its devastation around the world. So what can you do for us? 1, support us. 2, demand a reinstatement of that funding. Send us your children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews to study with us or intern with us. There's a sign-up sheet for more information. We also do in the fall a Cultivating Hope tour. We meet with leaders in Israel and Jordan and Palestine, so you can help us that way as well. So I want to close with an amazing email that I got from a Palestinian before Passover this year, and I read it at my Seder, and it was very well received. Dear friends, each year during the Passover Seder, you dip a finger in your cup of wine and remove 10 drops, one for each plague. Though the wine symbolizes joy, this ritual lessens it. It is a quiet, radical act of empathy, the recognition that freedom came with suffering, that even oppressors are human. As a Palestinian, this tradition humbles me. It reminds me that true values are often lived not in what we celebrate, but in what we choose not to. I was born into a story of loss. I remember when my maternal grandmother visited our village in the West Bank for the first time since 1948. She stood silently and said, "This looks like our home before they expelled us." In her eyes, I saw a reflection of something I never knew, and I inherited a vow many of us carry to make those who hurt us feel it too. For years, I believed in vengeance, not out of hate, but because I thought it was justice. Then one evening, during one of my many usual power cuts, bored and restless, I asked my father for a book. He gave me Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I didn't expect much, but in those pages, I met a man who endured unimaginable pain and still chose to see meaning and to stay human. And I realized that same fire that burned in me might have been the one that once burned in those who destroyed my grandmother's village. That's how the cycle continues. I couldn't let go of the pain, but I began to reflect on it, not to erase it, but to carry it differently, not to forgive the violence, but to end it. That's why the wine ritual moves me so deeply. It's not just symbolic, it's spiritual resistance, a reminder that empathy isn't weakness, it's discipline. To mourn even the pain of those who harmed you, that's moral courage. It calls us to break the cycle, not by forgetting, but by feeling fully and still refusing to pass the pain on. Today, this land is heavy with sorrow. Grief echoes on every side. Homes are gone. Futures feel uncertain. I know this is not the peace many of you hoped for. It's not what your ancestors dreamed of when they fled persecution in search of safety. So I ask you to reflect with me. Let us not pass our trauma to our children like a sword. Let us mirror something else, something brave and tender. Let us be the people that choose differently. To my Jewish friends, some of you are my mentors, collaborators, brothers, sisters in spirit. I wish you and your families a Passover of safety, meaning, and deep renewal. And I invite you this year not only to remember liberation, but to reflect on how we carry it forward in solidarity and reflection. Chag Pesach Sameach Chasan. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just sit for a minute and let his message enter our cells. Thank you for your passionate commitment. I think you can understand why I want to stay connected to this guy.
Well, it's a two-way street. I'm sure you guys also understand.
The Hebrew phrase af al pi, which means despite it all, to continue to hold this and pursue it. It is an option. Thank you again.
There's I've turned to Václav Havel a lot this last year and a half.
Wise choice.
You know, a dissident playwright, writer. We need more artists as political leaders. And he has this great quote on hope, and I'll paraphrase it, but he says, "Hope is not the same as optimism. Hope is the belief that what you do because it's right to do, even if it may not succeed."
Did you catch that? Do you want to say it again? Okay, good. Now I'm going to ask Michael a question that we've been talking about over the last couple of years, and then I'll invite any of you to ask him anything you'd like to ask. But this is actually, now that we've heard about the Arava Institute, which I've spoken about a lot over the years, and there's, if you want to be on the Friends of Arava Institute email list, Michael brought a clipboard that's out in the lobby. Would be most appreciated.
Which I really want back, because it's my father's of blessed memory clipboard. So.
Oh. Michael and I are both proud, progressive Zionists. I could say the metaphor I've had for that these last couple of years is I feel like I'm on a shrinking sandbar. Right? But this is where I stand. The possibility that this can be, that we get to live in our ancestral homeland along with the people who also live there. You know, that's a progressive Zionist vision. And Michael's been thinking about a lot. I wanted to ask you what you wanted to share about your thoughts about that right now.
Yeah. So, you know, after last year and all the question raised and so much pushback to Zionism, I started working on a piece which in essence is, you know, how can a progressive still be a Zionist? In some ways it's an answer to Peter, who was here the other week. And so I've been working on it. Israelis look at it, Palestinians, let it sit for a while, gone back to it. And I want to say, well, I could say a lot, but so Herzl writes The Jewish State in 1896, and it's a response to the growing anti-Semitism of Europe that eventually led to what we saw in the 20th century, that the need for Israel was there because of those activities. But 2 years later, or 6 years later, he writes Alte Neuland, his novel about what he envisioned the Zionist state would look like. In between is the first Zionist Congress. The Zionist historian Shlomo Avineri writes about that book, and he says, "The Jewish Commonwealth of Old New Land is based on universal suffrage, which in Herzl's days did not exist in any Western democracy save New Zealand. Rashid Bey, an Arab engineer from Haifa, is one of the new country's leaders and central figures in the novel. In fact, the issue of equal rights for the non-Jewish population is central to the novel's plot. What Herzl advocated was that the old new land should be both Jewish and democratic, a Jewish nation state, but that one that would preserve the equal rights for its non-Jewish population, not half-heartedly, but as a major tenet of its political and moral credo." So I call these two different works of Herzl, The Jewish State, which says we need Zionism because of anti-Semitism, I call that fear Zionism. And it's legitimate, and it's real. But he imagined in this novel what I call fulfillment Zionism. It was building the best society possible. And I'm not going to allow Bibi and Smotrich and Ben Gvir to hijack Zionism and say fear Zionism is the only Zionism. It's not. That other Zionism is there and just as real, and we have to get better at promoting it and living it and supporting it and not giving up on Zionism. I keep saying, like, who am I, after 2,000 years that we carry this idea of going home, you know, a national idea within a religion, which confuses people, which I understand, and we've got to do it. And I'm not belittling all of the conflicts and all of the problems that came out of that. But who am I to say, throw it out because it's messy? I'm going to say two more things, then I'll open it up more. So when my great uncle in Ternivka, this little town in the Ukraine where Dave Taras, for those of you who are Klezmer fans, came from, he told me when they heard about the Balfour Declaration, they were dancing in the street. And they were dancing in the street not as colonial imperialists, but as people who had waited with the Cossacks around them that they could finally be safe. That's what they heard, and that's what Zionism was about. Israel is now 77 years old. The United States was 77 years old in 1853. In that year, slavery was still legal and a core institution. Women, African Americans, and Native Americans did not have the right to vote, and Native Americans were being brutally massacred and cruelly displaced en masse. It would have been very easy in 1853 to say, this United States, get rid of it. But the pursuit of a more perfect union is a long arc that continues today and will continue tomorrow. And I'm not willing to write off Zionism for its shortcomings and transgressions, just like I'm not willing to write off Palestinian nationalism for its own grave defects and serious infractions as well.
Thank you. I appreciate both the geologic time perspective of tectonic plates moving and remembering that history just going back 150, 200 years when we're all wrapped up in the hourly checking. Yeah, so easy to forget that. Thank you.
And as you and I discussed, we can't be trapped. We can't be trapped in the history, but we need to know the history better. And both Israelis don't know their history as well, and they certainly don't know Palestinian, and vice versa. I'd recommend two books. One is Side by Side. Israeli and Palestinian historians tried to write a unified history. They couldn't. So they wrote a book that's called Side by Side, and one page is the Palestinian, and the other is Israeli, the same time period. The other is Oren Kessler just wrote a book called 1936 about that very important year. I think it's one of the most insightful, books that understands how we got to where we are today. Sidebar, his wife is one of the leaders of the dialogue projects at the Institute.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So the second book, go ahead.
Oren Kessler wrote it. It's called Palestine 1936. And that's got a few more words after it, but you'll find it if you Google that. Well worth reading.
Oh, I want to talk about that book. That was a very worthwhile read. It's not particularly it's not an optimistic read, but you understand so much more about the present from reading about the situation in the early part of the 20th century.
So I close this article I'm working on Zionism. In his invaluable book, Palestine 1936, on the subsequent events of that seminal year, Oren Kessler reminds us of another time when if a Jewish child and an Arab child were born near each other in the same quarter of Jerusalem, the same midwife would nurse both children, creating foster brothers with expected bonds between their families. This conflict will, now it's me, the conflict will not end with the victory of one over the other, but rather only once the understanding that redemption of one side can only happen with the redemption of the other as well. That is the foundation stone of which fulfillment Zionism is built.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Comments, questions? Susan, Karen's going to bring you the mic so that the people on Zoom can hear you. Okay, here it comes.
I have so many questions. So
I only have two answers.
Okay.
So pick, well.
One, why don't we hear more about this in America? In Jewish America, in Jewish everything in the world? Where do we get great PR? Who do we have to hire for great PR? I observe we're so transactional. It's if this, then that. I'm not hearing transactional in what you're doing. Does religion get in the way? And does the government get in the way of what you're trying to do? And when it does get in the way, which I'm sure it does, can you treat it as if it's a Palestinian and an Israeli?
Okay, a lot there. Yeah, I'm Jewish, but thanks. So part of the answer I would say is, in a world of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and where we have turned Judaism into basically tikkun olam, which is important, but it's not the totality of religion. With those glasses, I get where the critique comes from. It's a really important critique. And I've got a whole critique in here that, I didn't share with you, but there's a lot of critique of Israel in here. But I do it because, as I said here, it's a work in progress, and I'm not willing to throw it out because of its imperfections. So I'm hoping I'm going to send this to Jewish Currents, where a lot of these discussions taking place. So I'm hoping it'll get some light in terms of that. In terms of governments, well, clearly when USAID got cut, it wasn't geared towards us. It was part of a larger philosophical piece that hurt us. But that was not true with the United States government, and that's only been, the last 6 months. The Israeli government, we've gotten some funding over the years from various ministries. And I will say, in the early years of the Institute, Uri Stern of blessed memory was a refusenik who founded Yisrael Beitenu, like the very right-wing political party of Lieberman.
The Russians.
The Russians are coming. He was our greatest supporter in the Knesset. He and I could have huge disagreements on the political reality, but he understood that the environment didn't care about that stuff, and he was our greatest supporter. Yeah. So it cuts in lots of different ways. But you need to demand from the papers, and you want to hear this other stuff, because they've bought, well, people really just want the blah. And I get the draw, but as the beginning of the Siddur, we really should work to cultivating our better selves. And if we just cultivate that which is so negative and dark, we're not going to get out of this. And I don't just mean this conflict, all of the whole picture.
Well, when you slammed the table, no. That was good teaching. It's like, because that image is staying with me. The noise gets all our attention. And this big challenge that you're describing, Susan, that Michael also described.
Yeah. I just want to hear something that rings true. I don't want to just hear, oh, it's this or that. I hear "and" with you, which makes me happy, because I think if we can go to both "and" instead of either or, that's a lovely segue. And I also see the lack of education in what you're teaching. Our kids should be learning to talk to each other. Listen, we are the Palestinians and the Israelis in America.
In America right now, we're in the same boat.
We got all of this stuff going on, and look what they're doing. So fear is such a factor. How to live with fear and dialogue and all the things that work. But maybe there needs to be a cable channel or some way of bringing this to people so that they don't stay stuck in their reactivity.
Yeah, we have to get away from what I talk about, getting away from supporting Team Israel or Team Palestine. Yes. And there's too much of that. I describe myself as a Zionist, but I'm not pro-Israeli, nor am I pro-Palestinian, because we put that pro in front of any word, we don't do the self-critique. And for all these supporters who don't do the self-critique, it gets us also stuck. And that's a huge problem. And in terms of visionary, here's what Ahad Ha'am, the great Zionist thinker in 1920 wrote. However, this historical right of the Jewish people does not cancel the right of the other residents of the land, who come in the name of their concrete right to live and work in the land of generations. This land is also their national home in the present and allows them to develop their national strengths as well, according to their ability. This situation therefore makes the land of Israel a place shared by different peoples, each of whom is trying to build their national home there. This is now me. One of the greatest tragedies of this past 100 years is that we've never had leaders on both sides embrace at the same time that mutual recognition of each other's national aspirations. Now, maybe after this horrible war, there's going to be a reckoning in Gaza, and there's going to be a reckoning in Israel. There might be, we shall see.
Rich?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so impressed with what's happening at the Arava Institute, and especially the pluralistic aspect of it. There's a tendency to want to cultivate mere tolerance, but you're going deeper. Pluralism is really about hearing and understanding the other side, feeling uncomfortable with it, trying to absorb it without judgment, and through that, try to open up clearer communication, better understanding, and then make some progress. Tolerance doesn't really do that. You know, we want to be tolerant of our neighbors, despite our differences, but we might not go the extra step of trying to understand the other's behavior or attitudes. So yeah. I just want to acknowledge what you're doing and how important that is.
Yeah, that's right. That line in the graduation talk about that. Oh, sorry, my back. My back. So in the graduation talk, I had that line about peace is messy. I've had dear Palestinian, Jordanian friends for decades, and I know that we still have vehemently different ways that we perceive things, and that's okay. And part of the problem is people think that peace means all the problems go away. Peace means you're now going to deal with those problems finally, but in a peaceful manner. And so in Israel, to be a believer in peace is like a friar, you're a sucker. Because people think, well, if there's peace, everything goes away, and we know that's never going to happen, so there can't be peace. They don't understand what peace is about. And we have to get better about articulating. That's what that means. That means that's when peace arrives, then we can do the really hard work. That's going to take decades, if not generations.
Are there any video recordings at the Arava Institute that are available publicly that illustrate the process among the students?
We have interviews with students where they talk about, but we don't, because those sessions are really private, so we don't actually have any visuals of that, but we do have interviews of students talking about the process for sure. Yeah, it's not quite the same, but.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful in a really deep way. So I think a lot about generational trauma and ancestral trauma, and I think you touched on how the history of the fear piece is so critical and so disruptive to anything really meaningful evolving. And I do think that comes from generations of trauma, and every human group on earth has that history. And I know from what you describe, a lot of, I think, what happens at the Institute for these kids and for everyone who's participating is that there's really meaningful connectedness and time together, doing things other than discussing their feelings. And in that process, you're doing the basic human things that we have always done to sort of recenter and recalibrate and manage trauma, which is a physiologic phenomenon. And if you can talk till you're blue in the face, in my mind, and if you don't do the things that are going to recalibrate and really change those relentlessly repetitive cycles in our neurochemistry and physiology, I think we're stuck. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, I'm asking a question, but I know that you're already doing those things that re-establish a better pathway, let's say. But I also think there are a lot of tools out there that are very concretely capable of doing that. And I'm curious about how much that's consciously integrated into the process. I'm guessing it is, because I don't think you'd have the success, without it, but I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so the people who run the dialogue forum, read about that, integrate it. We do compassionate listening. There's a whole bunch of tools we try to give our students so they can do those encounters as successfully as possible.
I mean, breath is a big one.
Breath.
I can't help saying that, but
Yeah.
anyway, so I'm just, I'm so thrilled to hear all of this. And I spent a lot of time on Ketura.
Ah, when?
So I have family there. 81 and 85.
Who's your family?
Richie Goldstein at Ofra.
Oh, they just had a grandson.
Yes, they
Nice.
did.
Yeah.
They certainly did. Thank you so much.
Thank
So-
you.
I've been thinking about the level 1 and level 2. Is that the word you use? Track one and track two, you know, where track 1 is the state actors, you know, and track 2 is the Arava Institute. Right. And I have 2 questions about that. So of course, one question has to do with how many different organizations there are at level 2. I mean, there are a lot of organizations in Israel that are trying to promote coexistence and mutual understanding and so on. And I wonder that in this country too, would there be a way for those organizations to come together so that they gain size and power and force relative to level 1? And I guess that feeds into my second question, which is, how does the level 2 affect level 1? I mean, are there methods to get through to level 1?
Yeah, so there's actually something called, I'm spacing on the word here, track 1.5, which is actually a hybrid of the 2. Because at the end of the day, you do need the governments. And what we are trying to show the governments, this is how you can do it and be successful, but then use all of your largesse to succeed in a better way with all the power and all the money that governments often represent. So that's the real goal here. You know, there's the Alliance for Middle East Peace, which is an umbrella organization with some 160 organizations. So we try to do it's why, so there was the Nita Lowey Middle East Peace Partners Act that was passed a number of years ago, bipartisan, named after Nita Lowey, but signed by Donald Trump and Republican support. And that was only because of ALMEP. And ALMEP bringing these organizations together.
ALMEP is the Alliance for Middle East Peace, yeah.
Sorry. And that's how that happened. They used that, all of their stuff and all of the organizations, yeah.
And Michael built a really strong relationship with Senator Leahy. Is he still alive?
He is.
He is, good. And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the reasons,
It's good that Vermont's a very small state.
Yeah, it is. In deciding, you know, I was thinking, do I want to be a rabbi? I really want to do political work. I want to do things from a Jewish perspective. And Rabbi Dick Israel of blessed memory, one of my early rabbinic mentors, said, well, when you've got those 5 letters, R-A-B-B-I, in front of your name, you can do political work and no one's going to question it. So I said, okay, sounds good. So I go to rabbinical college, and then I go to Vermont, which is a really small state. And it was either I think it was the second visit to the Arava Institute. And I wrote to Leahy, you know, here's my insights of what's going on. He then sent me his personal email. And I've been writing and meeting him ever since. And he was really instrumental in a lot of the support in the big picture. And I will say that there was at one point when members of Congress thought, okay, you know, Israel gets all of this funding, you know, military aid and economic aid, and there's a lot of problems in the world. So maybe in this pie of helping Israel solve its problems with its neighbors, we should reduce that and give it to, you know, Africa. Now, philosophically, I actually agreed with that analysis. When you look at the amount of money that Egypt, Jordan, and Israel get from the United States, I mean, it's insane. On the other hand, I wanted our ecosystem to be funded. So I wrote one of my more passionate emails to the senator, and I said, instead of cutting up the pie, why don't you make the pie larger? And he did it. And that's part of what you can do in a small state. One of the things that I teach in my conflict resolution class that I teach at Bennington in our local high school, they can take it for Bennington credit, is this notion of agency. Because so many young people today feel they have no agency. And I say, we all have agency, doesn't mean we're going to succeed, the Havel quote. And I start with the following story in the first class, that after Martin Luther King was assassinated, this Jewish woman, Kligler, noticed that there were no African-American characters in Peanuts. So she writes to Charles Schultz and said, I think you need an African-American character. And Schultz says, I don't think as a white person I have the right to do this. So she turned to an African-American friend of hers and says, well, what do you think about that answer? And this friend said, he absolutely needs to do it. So she writes back to Schultz. 3 months after Martin Luther King is assassinated, Franklin appears in. Now, it's not earth-shattering, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And I teach that to my students for 2 reasons. One is you have agency, and also tenacity. She didn't give up. And those are so important. to have those and to imbue them in all of us.
Thank you. I want to add that thinking about Vermont and the small state it is, Israel's like Vermont. And you can have agency in Israel because everybody is 1 degree removed from everybody else. It makes you crazy, but it also means you can have access there. And I know that that's getting harder and harder as that society gets polarized, just like our own, and people just go to their corners. And so it's harder now, but it's one of the pleasures of being in Israel, actually. Anyone else? Erwin. Wait, Erwin, we're going to mic you so that the people on Zoom can hear you.
I've appreciated very much what you've had to say. Incidentally, I'm glad that you both have mentioned Vermont so much, because I wanted to mention Bill McKibben, who has a book coming out called Here Comes the Sun, and he will tell in that book about the incredible things that have been happening in the world, bringing the solar energy down and down and down in cost, and the potential that that has. And I see in the Arava Institute, you mentioned dust and solar energy. He's talking about something much broader, but I think there's hope there.
Yeah, Bill knows about us, and he's helped us, and I have I would say we're deep friends, but we know each other. Yeah.
And that article appeared not in print in the New Yorker, but online, an excerpt. And it's remarkable what we don't know until somebody tells us. Solar and wind energy have come so far down in cost. Production has ramped up so much, thanks to China, that it's growing now at an exponential, crazy rate. It's a really, reading the article from Bill McKibben, who certainly is not a Pollyanna, he's been Chicken Little for the sky's falling for a long time, and appropriately so. For him to now write about that, we might be approaching a paradigm shift. So that's also to say, and along with, I think lines up with Michael's talk, that we don't know the future, and therefore there's no reason to give up. Because we don't have the answer. We don't know what's going to happen. So tenacity and agency remain important no matter what's going on. Carol?
I have a question from on Zoom. How, for people on Zoom, if they want to join your mailing list, what's the best way to do that?
So you can go to either arava.org or Friends of the Arava Institute. Go to the website, and there'll be a place where you can click there to be added to the mailing list.
Okay, I'll try to find that and put it in the chat.
Okay, great.
That's
Thanks.
great.
Great.
Thank you.
Carol?
This is not a question, and just something that's been rolling around in my head is, it feels to me like the brilliance of the Institute and your work is those people are not just there to make friends. They are there for the environment. And they would not be there if they were not passionate about the environment. So there's something that they can all believe in, which is, sort of what we're losing here, certainly, is something that we can believe in. We don't know what's going on, but that there's such a wonderful lesson there, and maybe that's one of the answers we need to know.
No, and there are other organizations that bring together Israelis and Palestinians over music, over sports, over singing. I mean, you find something that's common as a human, and you discover the other.
It's a key to friendship, too, of any kind. Is like, you don't have to be talking intensely about your relationship all the time. In fact, you're gonna expire. So you find something nice to do together that you both care about. And
You can have
indeed.
fun.
Yeah.
I have a question. It all seems so biblical to me. Do you talk about that? About Ishmael and Isaac?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I teach a course sometimes there on the Bible and the environment, but what I also do actually is I do a weekly Parsha Shavua class, study of the Parsha, most semesters, and it's filled with Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, because those texts, they're human stories. And so we'll close here. So on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read one of the most difficult passages in the Torah when Hagar and Ishmael are, thrown out to die.
You say a little more. Some folks may not.
Oh, so in the second day reading for Rosh Hashanah, Hagar, who is the Egyptian maidservant of Abraham and Sarah, who's had Ishmael, who's now in competition with Sarah and Isaac, are left in the desert to die. It's very, very problematic, considering Ishmael represents the future generations of the Arabs. So one of the things I love about studying commentary is that we discover, we think we're modern and all wise and insightful. No, we're just human. The rabbis over 1,000 years ago were really bothered by that story. And so they create a midrash. Midrash are these stories that we create. If you will, commentary explains words and midrash fills the space between the words, for sake of argument. So they create this midrash. So Sarah eventually dies, but we know that Abraham marries a woman called Ketura, which the kibbutz is named after. But the rabbis say, well, who did he know? Well, Ketura is related to the word ketoret, incense. So he married somebody who was a pagan. Shocker. And they say that he actually married Hagar. So they do a repair of the story within the text. So at the Arava Institute on Kibbutz Ketura / Hagar, we are the living embodiment of doing that repair.
That's beautiful.
And I teach that there.
It's like Camilla. Camilla did that too.
My friends, thank you. And this has been part of our series that Rabbi Karen and I thought it was high time for us to do, called Leaning In, Let's Talk About Israel. And that's when Peter Beinart came and spoke with us. Then we had the program with Melila Hellner, Dr. Melila Hellner on Zoom from Jerusalem. Then we were going to have a program with a group called Galilee Dreamers, which was founded by my sister-in-law in the Galilee of Arab and Jewish teenagers. And that was scheduled right when the war with Iran was going on. So we postponed it. Everyone was in their safe rooms. So that will come. Also, we planned a trip to Israel for December. And we are postponing that trip as well. I've written to all the people who had expressed interest, and it was a nice group. We have the itinerary. It was called Seeking the Sparks of Light. We're going to be taking a trip to precisely this purpose. Everyone understood. It's like airspace is open, airspace is closed, tickets are canceled. It's just like it's too hard to try to plan a group trip, but that will happen in the future. And Rabbi Karen and I will be discussing other ways that we can continue to lean in to our relationship with Israel in the midst of this incredibly painful and sorrowful time in which there are human beings who are not succumbing and who can lift us up and remind us to keep moving forward. Karen, you want to say anything else?
Much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. We had over 40 people join us on Zoom. So very nice. Thank you so much, Rabbi Michael. Yeah. And just a reminder, we have a special service Friday night. We are doing a collaborative service with Kohenet Renee Finkelstein. She's the previous spiritual director at Kol Chai, which has in New Paltz, which has recently dissolved. And so she will be here. Cantor Rachel and I will do a 3-woman new moon celebration. It will be Rosh Chodesh on Friday night. And so I really hope you'll come. It'll be very musical, really beautiful. We'll have a beautiful kiddush afterwards and a lot of guests who will be joining us from around Ulster County. So that's really special. Yeah.
And there's some refreshments, and Rabbi Michael
refreshments,
can
so
stay. And I wanted to
bit.
say one more quick thing, which is if you want something out of nothing, hope, literally, physically, one of the things the Arava Institute has pioneered is a machine that draws moisture out of the desert air and creates drinking water.
Yeah, it's a company called WaterGen that we work with, and they've been working in Gaza and other places, and it does exactly that.
So you can bring this, it's essentially a dehumidifier that even in almost zero humidity can produce drinking water, and they've been supplying them to Gaza. So I just thought as a metaphor, as a physical thing that's a metaphor for I just wanted to mention that because I've been thinking about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.